Welcome back to the original Legend of Zelda. Last time we took on dungeons 7 and 8, and, got what we got in those, although I did miss the map in 8. I'm not feeling like grabbing it because I showed what it looked like in the last part, and I showed how to get through it, so it's not all that important. Now we're going to be heading to level 9, Death Mountain, and I'm going to be actually using the warp whistle to get to it. The way the warp whistle works, as I said before, and wasn't sure before, is that face the left and Link will warp going down dungeons. So the first time I used it, it sent me to dungeon 8, then it just sent me to dungeon 7, and now since I'm using it after having been at dungeon 7, I'm going to dungeon 6, which is where I want to be, because that's pretty close to Death Mountain, or Pinnacle Rock, rather. I think that's the name of the area. The dungeon itself is called Death Mountain. It's the only dungeon that really has a name that isn't what its map is, so that's kind of cool, I guess. You could also get there from dungeon 5 quite easily, but I don't know. I guess I felt like using the warp whistle one less time than required to get to dungeon 5, whatever. Also, you can't use the warp whistle on the screen of dungeon 7 because you can only use the warp whistle once per screen, so you have to exit the screen in order to use it again. And the problem is, the warp whistle automatically opens up dungeon 7 rather than warps you to anywhere, so once you've used it to open up dungeon 7, then you can't use it to do anything else. And here's Pinnacle Rock. There's two rocks here that are pretty identical. After I kill all these Lynels, or Lynels, I'm not sure where to put the emphasis on the syllable, and that lever, I was gonna say lever, that somehow went back into the ground even though time was supposedly stopped. I mean, he didn't make any, horizontal or vertical movement on the screen, but he went into the ground, which was kind of weird. Just to the left of Pinnacle Rock, there is another potion lady. There's actually a bunch of these throughout the land, and I only know the locations of 2 of them. But now we have a potion, so that's cool. Or medicine, I think it's called. So now we can head into Dungeon 9, Death Mountain, and it's white just like Dungeon 8. Also like Dungeon 8, it has 2 dungeon items. This room right here, there would be an old man saying you can't get past unless you have all of the Triforce. Luckily we have all of the Triforce, so the old man isn't going to stop us. This dungeon is quite difficult. There's going to be a lot of rooms with Wizrobes, which, as you know, they're my least favorite enemy, and somehow they can go into the little thing that you come out of when you enter a room, which is pretty lame because usually I consider that a safe spot. Usually projectiles can't reach you if you're in there, but no, Wizrobes want to break all the rules and end up hurting you from there. Here we have a pair of land molas. They're pretty similar to the Moldorm enemies that you may have seen in other dungeons if you were paying attention to the videos. And they can be taken down pretty much the same way. Just hit them on any part of their bodies and their bodies will start to shrink, and then once there's only one piece left, then one hit will kill them. This room has a bunch of likes. I think there's actually 5, even though it looked like there were only 4 or 3. Don't want to get eaten by those. You don't want to lose your magic shield in the middle of the final dungeon. That'd be pretty lame, especially because there's Wizrobes. And this final dungeon has you doing a lot of going through underground kind of areas and basically warping from one side of the dungeon to another, essentially. Which is kind of cool and kind of lame at the same time because there's a lot of bits of the dungeon that are sectioned off from each other. So it's easy to kind of do everything in a contained area. But the layout gets kind of confusing because you have to remember which way does this staircase take me? Does it take me all the way to the other side of the dungeon? Does it take me, up or down, like in terms of the map, like along the y-axis or the x-axis, I guess. This room is unnecessary. I'm going in here so I could grab the, I think, either the map or the compass, one of those two. In fact, a lot of this dungeon is pretty unnecessary. I could head straight to the boss, which is, you know, shown now, thanks to me getting the compass in this room. And I kind of got confused in terms of where to go. You're actually supposed to go back once you grab the compass, head up, and then to the right here, go through that door. There's a lot of keyholes in this dungeon. You're gonna need either a lot of keys, or if you're like me and you grabbed the, whatchamacallit, the magical key from Dungeon 8, you can just go through whatever key doors you want. They're basically not an obstacle anymore. The enemy that we just saw on the previous screen was called a Patra, like P-A-T-R-A. It has a bunch of little bugs flying around it. In order to hurt the Patra, you need to kill all the little bugs. And depending on the Patra, the bugs will have different patterns. The ones that we're seeing early on has the bugs kind of moving inward and outward. You really don't want to be near it when it's doing the outward stuff. But once they're all inward, you can pretty much spam your sword and take them all out very easily. And then once they've all been taken out, you can start actually attacking the big blue bug in the center. And that's how you kill them. They're honestly not that complicated. It's just that you can take a lot of pot shots when trying to deal with them. And if you don't know that you can't kill the blue one before killing all the orange ones, then you're in a little bit of a pickle. And check out the layout of the dungeon. Looks nothing like a death mountain. It is in fact a skull, which I think is pretty nifty. I like it. And here's another one of these rooms from Dungeon 6 with the like-likes and the bubbles and the whiz robes. I'm just gonna see if I can skip past this room, bomb a hole in the ceiling, and end up on an area that isn't on the map, actually. The map is pretty meaningless in this dungeon. The rooms that are next to each other don't actually go to each other a lot of the time. Again, they're sectioned off by the, by the rule that in order to get around, you need the staircases. And here's the first of the dungeon items, the optional one. This is the red ring. It makes your tunic red. And that means we only take a fourth of the usual damage. So enemies aren't going to be very much of a problem. The most they could do probably is 1 heart now, rather than, you know, Wizrobes doing 2 hearts, which really sucked. But you can pretty much tank a lot of the enemies in this dungeon now. And I've started to like having the red tunic be the ultimate tunic in games. Usually I'd like to keep the blue tunic because blue is one of my 2 favorite colors, the other being green. So it's pretty cool that Zelda uses blue and green a lot of the time. But I don't know, I've started to appreciate it being red more. Maybe because of Ocarina of Time. I always used to use the Zora tunic whenever I could in that game, but once I learned that the Goron tunic can beat pretty much any floor hazard, you know, me saying beat, I actually mean let you stand on any floor hazard. I thought it was pretty important to have it on in all times, and I guess I just warmed up to it. Because Ocarina of Time is weird and glitchy like that. As is this game. For some reason I thought there would be a lot more going through walls in this dungeon. I don't mean using a bomb on a wall, I mean like just walking into a wall and suddenly being able to go through it. That's not the case, and I'll talk about why I thought it was the case maybe a little bit later, actually very close to the end of this video. I'm not going to be visiting all the rooms in this dungeon either, because it's a long dungeon, a very big dungeon, the biggest, and a lot of the rooms aren't even actually on the map, like the boss room is in the left eye of the skull. So the map is misleading in that way. And here we have a pretty easy room with just a bunch of blue keys. Honestly, a kind of breather room, because if they do hit you, they're not going to completely take away a heart if you have the red ring. They'll take away what is essentially an eighth of a heart. So it'd take 2 hits for them to make your hearts look like they've gone down. Here's another Patra. This one spins in a different pattern rather than the circle getting bigger and smaller. Instead, the circle kind of moves in this weird pattern that kind of makes it look 3D, which is pretty cool. It's nice that they have, you know, an enemy that they're introducing in this dungeon, and then have another variant of that enemy that works in a different way. Although it looking the same does kind of make it a bit misleading. Maybe they could have made the ones that have the circles that get bigger and smaller be red, and maybe the ones that have the circle kind of spin around in a 3-dimensional way be blue, but whatever. They're still pretty fun to take down, I think. If I could just actually take it down so I could push the block here and not die, hopefully. Yeah, I come very close to dying, mostly because of my recklessness. This dungeon isn't actually super duper hard. Maybe at the beginning of it, when you don't have the red ring, or if you're not planning on getting the red ring, it would be pretty hard. But once you have it, and you're at full health, then it's not really that big of a deal. Enemies drop hearts often enough, and there's not much that can be a threat to you. Whenever I pause the game, I would kind of panic because I'm like, oh my god, I'm missing an item for some reason. I could have sworn that that slot was filled earlier. I thought it was for like potions or something, but then I realized that the paper is for the potions. It's actually for the bait. I didn't go buy another piece, and for some reason, when you use the bait in that one room in Dungeon 7, I think it was, it goes away. But if you were to use the bait in any other room, like literally any other room, be it in a dungeon or out in the overworld, it doesn't disappear. It stays with you. So it's kind of weird that you'd have to buy bait again, and bait is a pretty useless item. Anyway, this room right here, a bunch of Wizrobes, a bunch of bubbles, no like-likes, so thank goodness for that. We need to kill all the enemies so that we can have access to another underground area. This one, you need to access it by pushing the block on the side once all the enemies are killed, and I believe this will lead us to the second dungeon item, the one that's actually required to beat the final boss. This is the Silver Arrow. It doesn't really look silver, it's blue, but whatever, it's silver. And it's basically a anti-Ganon kind of measure thing, you know, like light arrows in Ocarina of Time, or the Master Sword in every game that the Master Sword appears in. Now that we have this, we can deliver the final blow to Ganon. If you were to go to Ganon's room and not have these silver arrows, then you'd be pretty much screwed. And they function like regular arrows. I don't think they have a power-up, or they are powered up from the regular ones. They still take 1 rupee to use, and I have almost 100 rupees, so that's not going to be that big of a deal anyway. So really a cosmetic difference, except for the part where you need it to kill the final boss. In this room, no, it's not this room. There's going to be a room coming up where there's the, whatever those things are, the spike traps or whatever, on the sides of the room in the 4 corners, kind of like this room. And there's also going to be a staircase in that same room, but the staircase usually appears in the corner of the room when it's not, you know, initially in the room. I think this might be the room right here. Yep, you need to kill all the Wizrobes, and once you do that, push the block on the left, and it reveals a staircase in the top right corner. But there's a spike trap there, so you need to lure the spike trap away, and then get into the room so that we can take another underground staircase and finally make it on the path to Ganon. Oh wait, there's even another underground staircase that we have to take before going to Ganon. This dungeon is very confusing. I tried practicing this dungeon and getting through it on my own. And for the most part, you can do that with all the other dungeons, but this one I really did need to have a map in order to get through it. Like, I didn't use a map for all the other dungeons. I really don't like using guides in games. It's kind of a weird way of justifying it in my head, like, oh, I'm not going to use a guide the first time because that kind of spoils stuff. And I'm going to get 100% without using a guide because, I don't know, I just like doing things on my own. And then after I get 100%, I'm not going to use a guide after that because I've gotten everything in the game once, so I should be able to get everything again without using a guide. So guides are a desperate measure kind of thing for me. And this was a desperate measure. I needed a guide for this dungeon, sad to say. That is kind of a complaint with this Zelda game. It's very hard to do without maps. Like, if I'm gonna recommend this game to someone who hasn't played it before, I'd recommend it to them. And also, you know, have the caveat that's like, if you're gonna play this game, use some outside help. This isn't gonna be a game you can blaze through, which, you know, some games aren't going to be games that you can blaze through, and some people like that they aren't, so to each their own. I'm kind of giving a final thoughtsy rant here because we're at the end of the game, at the final boss, and the credits are very short, so I kind of have to give my opinions now, and also explain the boss now. Ganon likes to turn invisible and teleport around the room. You basically just stab randomly until you poke him, and once you do, he does a little pose, and he teleports away. You need to repeat this process 2 more times, so stab him a couple more times. An easy way to do this is to just stand in the corner of the room and repeatedly stab, so just don't move around and eventually he'll come to you. And once you stabbed him 3 times, he becomes red on the last stab. You shoot him with a silver arrow, and he's dead. That's it. That's Ganon. We beat him. Very easy boss. You can take a lot of pot shots, but they don't do enough damage to warrant something like another potion. And clear the fire, refine Zelda, and beat the game, essentially. This text here that says "Thanks, Link," it doesn't change if you made a different name for your profile. So Link is officially named Link in this game. Kind of weird that in the first game you're able to choose a name and also at the same time not able to choose a name. The staff credits are very slow, so I'm not very slow, very short, so I'm just gonna give my final thoughts again. This game probably need a guide to beat it, but I don't think that that's really a bad thing for the most part. I don't need a guide because I've memorized a lot of it. But if you're gonna play it on your own, probably use one. Definitely not my favorite Zelda game by a long shot. It's pretty low on there, but it's still a fun time. And I'm a Zelda fanboy. I wouldn't say that there's a bad Zelda game. Maybe Zelda 2, but at the end of the credits you can start a second quest. And the second quest has some different layouts of the world. Well, the world map is pretty much the same, but the dungeons are different. The locations of shops are different. I'm not going to be playing the second quest because that's a bit of a chore, but, you know, if you want to play the game differently because you memorized it too much, then maybe give the second quest a go. That's going to be it from me. So next time we go into the Zelda series, I'm going to be playing a 3D Zelda game.